Welcome to Global Trends and Cycles. I'm Marie Sheppel, and in this video, I'll be analyzing how Pluto is affecting the United States and its allies, some of whom might be better described as frenemies, and that's not who you think. Transiting Pluto and the nodes have been moving in a close T-square formation for most of 2023, indicating the need for a major decision and a turning point. And this applies to everyone, not just those whose charts are closely aspected by this configuration. On October 10th, transiting Pluto returned to direct motion at 27 degrees 53 minutes Capricorn, conjunct the U.S. natal Pluto, 27 degrees 33 minutes Capricorn, and the second house of the Sibley chart for the U.S. Note that transiting Pluto returning to the same position it held when the U.S. was born, so to speak, means this is the Pluto return for the U.S., its first Pluto return. As Pluto moves quite slowly, Pluto was at its stationary point for several days. On October 8th, 2023, transiting Mars, 27 degrees 53 minutes Libra, squared both transiting Pluto and the U.S. natal Pluto, and Mars was conjunct the transiting South Node. Hamas launched a shock attack on Israel on October 7th, and the U.S. declared its full support of Israel. With this transiting Mars-Pluto configuration aligning with the U.S. natal Pluto under its first Pluto return, the U.S. should carefully consider becoming directly involved in any conflict, in the Middle East or elsewhere, or it could find itself in another situation like it faced in Afghanistan and Iraq in the past, as I'll explain in a minute. Pluto and Mars are co-rulers of the sign Scorpio, and for this U.S. natal chart, Scorpio rules the 12th house. The current U.S. President, Joe Biden, has his natal sun in Scorpio. With these two planets in square aspect, as Pluto was making its return to its natal position in the U.S. natal chart, the U.S. finds the agenda it pursues, due to it being the most militarily powerful country in the world, running towards a brick wall. That is, unless the U.S. not just changes, but transforms the way that it yields such power. One thing about the U.S. natal Pluto: it is part of what I consider to be the most powerful configuration in the U.S. chart, but it is a configuration by declination, not by longitude. Pluto is at 23 degrees 43 minutes south declination, and Venus is at 23 degrees 31 minutes north, and Mars at 23 degrees 34 minutes north are contra-parallel Pluto. Aspects by declination are extremely powerful, and this one is doubly so, as all three of these natal planets, Pluto, Venus, and Mars, are out of bounds. This configuration of the U.S. natal chart indicates the military might of the U.S., and that the country will always be able to lean on that military supremacy to push its own economic strength. Say what you will about this, but it can't be denied that if you are a U.S. citizen or immigrant to the U.S., your standard of living is higher than it probably would be in any other country because of this configuration and the way of yielding power that it indicates. Pluto transits to sensitive points of a natal chart indicate a significant, life-changing event on a massive scale. For instance, the U.S. was impacted strongly by the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 2001. On August 5th, 2001, transiting Saturn, 12 degrees 37 minutes Gemini, opposed transiting Pluto, 12 degrees 37 minutes Sagittarius, and Pluto was conjunct the U.S. natal ascendant, 8 degrees 14 minutes Sagittarius. The terrorist attack on the U.S. occurred on September 11th. Pluto had been retrograde and went direct on August 23, 2001 at 12 degrees 32 minutes Sagittarius, transiting Mars, almost conjoined Pluto on July 19, 2001, the day it went direct at 15 degrees 6 minutes Sagittarius. So here we have another case of transiting Pluto and Mars, and in this case Saturn, interacting very closely with a U.S. natal position, in this case the ascendant. In 2023, the transiting Mars-Pluto square, as Pluto made its direct station, hit the U.S. natal Pluto. In both 2001 and 2023, transiting Pluto made its direct station closely conjunct a U.S. natal position. Note also that on August 5, 2001, both transiting Venus and Jupiter had returned to the positions they held on July 4, 1776, and the transiting North Node was conjunct them. The U.S. began military action against al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan on October 7, 2001. This military operation lasted 20 years. About the best that can be said about the operation is that it opened up educational and career opportunities for Afghani women and girls. And like numerous wars over the past 200 years, it benefited women in an indirect way, just as World War II increased the freedom and status of women in the U.S. But that's a topic for another video. Considering the ultimate result of the U.S. intervening in Afghanistan after the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 2001, and later in Iraq, it doesn't look promising for the U.S. to take part in war in the Middle East in 2023 and beyond. Remember, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction intensified the wave of authoritarian repression across the world, a trend that had begun with the Saturn-Pluto opposition of 2001. This Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which occurred at 22 degrees 46 minutes Capricorn, was on the contra-antiscion of the U.S. natal Uranus, 8 degrees 55 minutes Gemini, and the natal descendant, 8 degrees 14 minutes Gemini. It was actually a stellium of the Sun, Saturn, Pluto, and Mercury on the contra-antiscion of natal Uranus. Note also that transiting Mars was conjunct the U.S. ascendant, so there's a double effect here, for not only was the stellium on the antiscion of the U.S. ascendant, it was also on the antiscion of transiting Mars at that moment. Thus the two planets most associated with war, Mars and Uranus, were involved. The 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction triggered changes to how the U.S. will deal with demanding and/or authoritarian regimes, whether they are allies or enemies. Because the aspect to Uranus was by contra-antiscion, which acts like an opposition, there will be open, direct challenges to the U.S., and the U.S. will also threaten others during the first half of the current Saturn-Pluto cycle. The probability of the U.S. actively undertaking military action is less now than it was in 2001, but there is still a strong probability of it. In 2001, as the Saturn-Pluto opposition aligned with natal Uranus, 8 degrees 55 minutes Gemini, transiting Uranus, 23 degrees Aquarius, was near the progressed Sun, 26 degrees Aquarius, and the natal Moon, 26 degrees 58 minutes Aquarius. Uranus is a very warlike planet, and its 84-year cycle does coincide with major U.S. wars. Considering that it's now 22 years since September 11, 2001, Uranus has covered roughly 1/4 of its cycle, with transiting Uranus at this time at 22 degrees Taurus, squaring the position it held in September 2001. However, transiting Uranus is now squaring progressed Mercury, 22 degrees Aquarius, and is moving to square the U.S. natal moon, 26 degrees Aquarius. Uranus in Taurus is in the U.S. 6th house of the military, and Mercury is the natural ruler of the 6th house. These long-lasting square aspects by Uranus indicate that the U.S. needs to exercise caution and discretion in how it uses and positions its military forces, especially when transiting Uranus is in close square to the natal moon. For this configuration indicates that the U.S. could be vulnerable to retaliatory attack. This configuration also indicates that the U.S. may find itself having to be the one to shoulder responsibility for financial aid to another country or group of people, because Cancer rules the U.S. 8th house, and the moon rules Cancer. The U.S. poured money into Afghanistan, and yes, there was some progress made there to modernize that country and introduce rudimentary democracy, but some people feel the money was wasted. The U.S. needs to take the role of a mediator in any disputes between other countries at this time, and not take sides, or it will find that the rest of the world just expects it to shoulder the major portion of the expense of cleanup and reconstruction, just as happened in Afghanistan. The U.S. is especially vulnerable to attack or being drawn into military action in April 2024 under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, late June through August 2024 as Uranus squares the U.S. natal moon, and December 2024 to late April 2025 due to progressed configurations, and March-April 2025 under the Venus-Saturn-Mercury-Neptune North Node quintuple conjunction in Pisces, which occurs as Venus is retrograde. On March 30th, 2024, the U.S. natal chart has a progressed new moon at 19 degrees 26 degrees Pisces, and the transiting South Node conjoins progressed Mars 16 degrees Libra the same day. During this time, transiting Mars and Saturn are about to conjoin at 14 degrees 40 minutes Pisces. That occurs on April 10th, 2024. This Mars-Saturn conjunction is in conjunct, that's a 150-degree angle, the U.S. natal Saturn at 14 degrees 48 minutes Libra. There's a lot of frustration with allies leading up to March-April 2024. The Mars-Saturn conjunction forces action. Unfortunately, the action taken may not turn out so well over the long run, due to the transiting South Node conjunct progress Mars, which indicates rash action. There's a lot of activity in the charts for Saudi Arabia currently and in March and April 2024. The Saudis are being thrust into a leadership role, and they will grab the chance and run with it. Let's take a look at the configurations to the three charts I use for Saudi Arabia. Each is valid in its own way, and all three show a heightened leadership role for the Saudis. But this is shown most explicitly by the 1902 sunrise chart. The transiting Pluto node's T-square aligns with progressed Saturn in the 1902 chart for Saudi Arabia. Transiting Pluto conjunct progressed Saturn 27 degrees 44 minutes Capricorn, and it loosely aligns with the natal Sun-Jupiter conjunction 24 degrees Capricorn. It's this alignment with the natal Sun-Jupiter conjunction that favors Saudi Arabia in what is developing on the world stage. The new moon of November 13th, 2023, impacts the 1923 chart for Saudi Arabia in an aggressive way. The new moon, 20 degrees 43 minutes Scorpio, is conjunct, transiting Mars, 22 degrees Scorpio, and they conjoin the Saudi progressed Mars, 18 degrees Scorpio, and all oppose transiting Uranus, 21 degrees Taurus. Note that the opposition forms a T-square with natal Neptune, 19 degrees Leo, and Neptune rules the 7th house of allies and opponents. Transiting Pluto, 28 degrees Capricorn, conjoins progressed Mercury, and both are trine the natal Sun, 29 degrees Virgo, allowing the Saudis a leadership role. There are definitely important differences of opinion between the Saudis and others, but this new moon gives the Saudis a powerful hand to play. On April 10th, 2024, the transiting Mars-Saturn conjunction conjoins Saudi Arabia's natal and progressed Uranus, 15 degrees Pisces, and opposes natal Mars, 14 degrees 2 minutes Virgo, for the 1923 natal chart for Saudi Arabia. The Mars-Saturn conjunction falls in the sunrise 6th house of the military. This indicates a show of strength and determination by the Saudis in response to aggression. This is not good for peace, at least not on the short run. The 1926 chart for Saudi Arabia shows the transiting T-square aligning with the natal nodes, 25 degrees Cancer, Capricorn, and the progressed Sun, 25 degrees Aries. Again, the Sun is involved, giving the Saudis a leading role in what is developing. This chart has natal Mars, 7 degrees, 48 minutes Sagittarius. So this position of Mars is on the anticyon of the 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction at 22 degrees 46 minutes Capricorn, which also means this natal Mars conjoins the U.S. natal ascendant. The Saudis have clout in the situation, and they know it. And although there is friction between the two countries, they will cooperate. The positions of the U.S. natal Uranus, the Saudi natal Mars, and the 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction foretell a very interesting entanglement of these two countries over the coming years. From late December 2024 through March 2025, the U.S. progress chart has the Sun, the Moon, and Mars in very close parallel, around 3 degrees 30 minutes to 4 degrees south. This triple progressed parallel is also parallel the U.S. natal Saturn at 3 degrees 31 minutes south. By longitude, transiting Mars, 1 degree Leo, is retrograde and opposes transiting Pluto, 1 degree Aquarius, on January 1st and 2nd, 2025, and they form a T-square with the U.S. progressed Saturn, 2 degrees Scorpio. This is a time of hair-trigger tempers in the U.S., and with the progressed planets parallel natal Saturn, the U.S. is in a strong, perhaps too strong, position to act decisively. This could be military action, but is much more likely to be a change in economic ties with allies. In the spring of 2025, the 1923 Saudi chart has a progressed Moon-Mars conjunction forming in Scorpio in the sunrise 2nd house of its economy. There may be a breakdown between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia over both military and economic issues, though I won't say that it's permanent. The transiting Uranus-Pluto trine of 2027 aligns with the U.S. natal Uranus and descendant. So it's the U.S. Uranus return. Is that good or bad? Considering that Pluto at that time will be conjunct the U.S. natal south node, 7 degrees 35 minutes Aquarius, it may seem to be good, but again, current events and astrological configurations to the U.S. chart point to some difficult transformations of long-held alliances by the U.S. But that's just the point. These alliances and the U.S. approach to them need to change. That's what Pluto does. It brings vitally necessary change. And if you don't just go along with Pluto's flow, Pluto will force you to go along with its agenda. And Pluto is not gentle about it. Just ask anyone who's been through a Pluto transit. What's one word to describe the experience of a Pluto transit of an important natal position? Painful. Sometimes excruciatingly painful. And that's because most people resist Pluto's agenda. But that's to be expected. Remember, Pluto is death, and death is the great unknown. Transiting Pluto conjunct the U.S. natal south node will make it difficult to just revert to the status quo reaction, which is how most people and countries deal with a Pluto transit. The issue for the U.S. now is to transform its dealings with other countries so there's more economic equality and justice going around, and less favoritism of dubious allies. Priorities will change for the U.S., with alliances that have been prioritized above others going to the side, and what, up until now, have been secondary alliances coming to the fore. The U.S. has used its economic power in some fantastic ways and some despicable ways over the years. Now Pluto is saying to the U.S., your approach to using your economic and military power, especially with respect to alliances and disputes with other countries, must change if you want to continue to progress and thrive. If you don't change, you will no longer thrive. Thank you for watching today. Please subscribe. I hope this video gave you useful insights for making decisions in your personal life and your business. Bye for now.